All right, Stewart Mandel. And if anyone hasn't read it, I encourage you, just go to the Athletic website, log on Stewart's story from last week about a potential way to play college football the 2020 season, but actually in 2021, starting on New Year's Day. And I won't go over the whole details here. I want you to read it, but it is really, I found it fascinating, Stewart, because it was thoughtful. It was providing solutions as opposed to criticizing. And I'm fascinated, first of all, what kind of blowback have you gotten from people?
Not, I don't think I got blowback, other than there are obviously some fans out there in parts of the country that don't want to even entertain the idea that football might not start on time or that there might not be fans in the stands. I think most people are realistic and know that right now that's a very serious possibility. And most importantly, athletic directors and commissioners and presidents are already at least starting to devise these contingency plans. So there's any number of options that might, become reality eventually. But I think everybody realizes that we're kind of already up against it. Most schools are holding online only classes at least through summer term. So now you're talking about athletes not being able to get back to start training for the season until early August. They probably need more than a month. So, of course, I don't think all schools are going to be aligned on this. So, very strong possibility the season's going to be delayed in some way. It's whether it's a couple of weeks or, as it's outlined in my story, all the way until January.
Yeah, so what, and I'm interested, did anybody from within college football talk to you? Did you hear from people saying, hey, either, hey, there's some traction there, or you're crazy, or, did you get reaction from within?
Well, I called people beforehand to run things by them. In fact, there was a couple of things I changed when I realized, oh, that's not going to be realistic, or this is not going to be realistic. But honestly, nobody. It's almost like nobody wants to admit that this might have to happen. There's a lot of like, well, hopefully it doesn't come to that. Like hopefully we kick off Labor Day weekend. And I also heard from people who say that even if it does go to spring semester, starting at New Year's Day, like you do in my story, is not realistic, that it might not happen until after the Super Bowl.
Huh. I thought the way you framed this, New Year's Day starting and finishing on the same weekend as Final Four, I thought that was terrific. I mean, you talk about trying to make a spectacle out of a return. Uh, I thought those ideas were terrific, and I'm with you in that. Look, this is a way. It's a possible way out. What my concern is, I guess, is that who's going to be the first? And I think what we're seeing in the country right now indicates it may be the SEC, but who's going to be the first to stand up and say, yeah, we're going, we're playing, right? Who's going to do that?
It's going to depend a lot on what happens in our country over the next few months. I mean, I do think that in the last week, as you've seen a lot of states in the South start reopening, whereas obviously here in California, they're being much more cautious, then okay, college football fans are starting to draw those parallels and say, oh, it could be exactly true. It could be the SEC saying we're ready to go and the Pac-12 saying absolutely not. We just don't know. I hope that the virus stays under control and starts going down, but we just don't know what that's going to look like. As of now, it seems like the Power Five conferences are coordinating with each other. They're communicating with each other. Commissioners have a call almost every day of the week. And you would hope, for the sake of college football, that whatever they end up doing, they do in lockstep. I don't think it would be healthy if you play a season and some conferences or some schools are in it and some aren't. It should be all or nothing. But obviously, college football is very decentralized. There's no commissioner. The NCAA really has very little to do with how it's run. And so if it were to come to that, where come September 1st, everybody in the South is itching and ready to go, and people in the West or other parts of the country aren't, you could see it, unfortunately, becoming a little bit of a every man for himself.
Yeah, that's exactly, you hit it, Stuart. That's what I've been thinking. I mean, obviously, we both live in Pac-12 territory, and that's where I hear a lot. And I know that's a concern within the Pac, for example, is that the nation has to go together on this.
Hmm.
But we've already seen it. It's only April, and we're seeing how the South is kind of going on its own schedule here. I have a hard time seeing how in September, now this is a projection clearly, but in September, assuming there's no massive outbreak, that Mississippi and Louisiana and Auburn and Georgia aren't just going to say, we're going, we're going to play.
I think they're going to do that if this all goes well. We're all sitting here, Georgia has become like the test case. There, you can, it's. I told somebody today it's very surreal to be sitting here in California where they just extended the stay-at-home in the Bay Area, where they just extended the stay-at-home order through the end of May. And meanwhile, I'm on Twitter and I can see pictures of people in Georgia eating at Waffle House and getting their haircut and all of those things.
Yeah.
But I think, I really try to keep this within football, when I talk about this, and not try to become a health expert that I'm not. But everything I read suggests that we're going to be going through a lot of starts and stops where things will open up and then the infection rate might spike and you have to slow it back down. And then you do that again. And so the question is, when these decisions for the football season have to be made, which I assume will be no later than July 1st, maybe even sooner than that, which wave will we be in? Because that's going to determine whether universities decide they can safely open in the fall. And then football is completely dependent on that. I would say if in every conference there are certain universities that say we don't think it's going to be safe, then that's where I think everybody would have to agree to put it off. The scenario that you hope won't happen is that all 14 SEC universities are open for business and 3 of the 12 Pac-12 schools are not, because that's where it could get kind of ugly.
Exactly. Let me throw a couple of concepts, some of which you touch on in your story. We've heard it bounced around. Conference only games. Your proposal that you put out has a 10-game season. The conference only makes sense until I think about one thing in college football, which is fairly significant, and that's called Notre Dame.
Yeah. I don't think you're going to have a season without Notre Dame. You look at a school like Navy that plays probably its 3 most important games of the year are not in their conference, Army, Air Force, and Notre Dame. So the conference only thing makes sense at first glance. And then you realize, is South Carolina going to not play Clemson? Is Florida not going to play Florida State? If you say it's a shortened season, some of those schools would probably rather sacrifice a couple of their conference games than lose their big out-of-conference rivals. Hopefully we can just play the full 12, 13 game season. The reason I shortened it, and the reason a lot of people suggest that it'll have to be shortened, is the further you go away from September, and certainly once you get into a January start date, now you have to start thinking about the back end. NFL draft comes up in late April, maybe early May. Guys are going to want to start getting ready for that. You could potentially lose all the top players in the sport, theoretically, or a lot of them who don't want to risk injury and want to start training for the draft. So there's that part of it. And there's also, hey, what about the 2021 football season? We can't start in January, early February, and play 14, 15 games, then ask them to come back in September and play another full season. So I do think if the season's delayed, even by a month or so, or a couple months, you're going to have to start talking about a shortened schedule to preserve guys' bodies.
Yeah, and you hit on another point I was going to touch on was we just went through the NFL draft. And I was actually talking to Yogi about this off our pod that, hey, some guys who made decisions to go pro in the NFL and didn't get drafted as highly as they may have wanted still may be better off because of the uncertainty right now. They had no idea in December, January, when they're making their decisions, this was going to happen. But because of the uncertainty in the college game, they may be better off going pro now. Would that follow through? If we have a delayed season in college football, would top tier guys just say, the heck with it, I'm just going to go and get myself ready for the NFL draft?
Yeah, I think if you're Trevor Lawrence, if you're Justin Fields, if you're Jamar Chase, and you really don't have much left to prove, you can probably do that. Where it's going to be a much tougher decision is for, most NFL draft prospects need to get another season on tape. Maybe you're a senior who didn't start for the first time until you're a junior. Maybe you right now are considered a 4th rounder and you want the opportunity to prove you're a 2nd rounder. I don't think most draft prospects are in a position to say I'm skipping the whole season. That's why, but you definitely want to give them a window to, I think it would be only fair that they at least have a window to, for instance, in my scenario, right, most teams, unless you're in the playoff, we're used to players skipping bowl games. So theoretically, you could at least get a 6-week window in there to start prepping for the draft, unless you're on a playoff team and want to obviously finish out that run. And this, by the way, I'm saying all this assuming the NFL will be kind of rigid. They don't usually like to let anybody tell them you should push your draft back to late June because college season is going to be delayed. That I think they'll work with them a little bit, but not to that extent.
No, no, that ain't going to happen. Um, Bowl games, you talk about that in your story. I'm interested. If I've gathered from listening to you in the past, you're okay with the high number of bowl games?
Yeah, I kind of there was a time maybe 10 years ago or more where I didn't like it, and then I went totally the other direction. Um, it's not hurting anybody. I mean,
No,
you
that's
can play
right.
the Camellia Bowl, play whatever, but you don't have to watch it if you're not interested. But the interesting thing is those games do much better than I think people would expect. And it's December. There's not a lot else going on, and it gives an opportunity for the Group of Five schools that there's a lot of those teams that I don't see play a game during the regular season, and then that bowl game is the first chance I get to see Louisiana Lafayette or any number of those schools. So no, I don't have a problem. Now it is getting even bigger. There's 3 more games coming this year. And, that was some of the discussions I had leading into that article was talking with bowl officials who are basically whatever they decide to do, we'll adapt to it because we can't go a whole year and just not play the bowl game. A
Right.
lot of these bowls, frankly, wouldn't survive that.
And that's why I was going to go because this ties into my other point I wanted to bring up. Um, the vast look, bowl games have several tiers, and the top tier bowl games are terrific, and they have history and they sell, and that's fine. A growing number of them exist, and someone who started a bowl game not that long ago told me you only need 2 things: you need an ESPN contract and you need a title sponsor. You don't have to sell a ticket. Those two, if you have those 2 things, you have a game. My point being, a lot of them are TV programming, right? There are very few people in the stands, which gets into the point of, are we prepared? Do you think college football is legitimately preparing, Stewart, for football without fans?
I think
I'll
that's
ask this, and I'll tell you why. I was talking to somebody in my other world, tennis, who's very involved in American tennis tournaments, and they are actively talking about coming back sometime summer or fall, they hope, but it's almost every scenario is closed.
mhm.
Almost every scenario they're discussing is to put on a tour, to have events, but there will not be spectators. So that's where I'm going with this. Do you think college football is prepared for that?
I think there's a little bit of I think that's a very polarizing topic right now. I think that some people who are reading what health experts are saying realize that we're a long ways away. That's going to be the very last thing that comes back. Large events with 70,000 people in the stands, and that might not be till sometime in 2021. But there's others, coaches, commissioners, ads, who feel like if it's not safe for the fans to come, that's probably not safe for the players, or the fans are too important a part of college football to play the games without them. I think at the end of the day, as we know, they're going to do everything possible to play a football season. They cannot afford, Alabama cannot afford to skip a football season because 85% of their revenue comes from football. And so if it means, okay, you're going to lose ticket revenue, which is a substantial amount of money, don't get me wrong, but at least keep the TV money, you got to do that. You can't say we're going to lose both. So are they prepared for it? No, but I think they're probably going to have to start accepting that that's probably the reality, especially in the fall. Maybe if you can buy some time and there's enough medical advances and testing advances that's more feasible in January or February, okay. But there's not going to be fans in a football stadium in September. I'm not a health expert. I feel pretty confident saying that, though.
Yeah. All right, let me bounce around a couple of other just college football things. What did you take away from the draft we just had? 40, I think it was 40 SEC players in the first 3 rounds, basically 40 out of 100 or a little over 100. Surprise you? Is it a true statement of the balance in college football right now?
I mean, it's been building that way for probably 15 years, and I think that there was a point maybe a few years ago where the SEC had a down year or two, and people thought maybe the ACC or somebody else was going to catch up to them, and then it went in the complete other direction. They spend the most money on coaches. They spend the most money on recruiting. The South has the most talent across the board. So it's not surprising they're bringing in the most talent in recruiting. They're signing all the top 10 classes. It's not surprising that they're then putting the most players in the NFL. I thought what was particularly amazing about this year, though, was just how much LSU and Alabama put in there, including 14 players tied for the record for LSU. I covered that 1 versus 2 game they had this year, and you kind of got that sense you were watching two very special teams with a lot of NFL players on the field, and the draft confirmed that.
Yeah. Um, the 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 I listened to a conversation last week that Jack Swarbrick, the Notre Dame athletic director, had, and he was answering some questions, and I thought he was extremely open, honest in talking about the inequity that we've heard that you've written a lot about. You talk a lot about the revenue inequities within the conferences, and of course Notre Dame factors into this. And he talked about it on two fronts. He was asked about Notre Dame's television deal, and he said, "Look, our NBC deal, our over-the-air deal, is fine." But he said the conference networks are what's causing, and it's two of them. It's the SEC network and the Big Ten network that are causing an incredibly growing disparity, which again has been documented. But he said that, and the other issue he mentions was name, image, likeness, as the acronym goes, the NIL. And he's concerned about that if the revenue disparity and where the SEC and the Big Ten have an advantage play into NIL issues and create a recruiting issue. He said that's the two things that may have to be addressed significantly. And I thought it was pretty candid of him to say that, to admit that, for example, Notre Dame's over-the-air package he's completely fine with, but they don't have a conference TV package. And that's where he fears that college football's stratification is going to accelerate.
It's interesting he said that, because Notre Dame's deal with NBC is actually pretty modest compared to, I mean, Purdue makes a lot more from just picking them out at random. Purdue makes a lot more from the Big Ten's TV rights than Notre Dame does from its NBC deal. And I don't think that's all just the Big Ten network, but the NIL issue, and we're recording this a few hours after the NCAA Board of Governors put out their recommendations. I get the concern why they think that would disproportionately favor schools, but at the same time, this proposal or this set of recommendations specifically says the schools can't be involved in the payments. This is entirely about athletes getting endorsement deals, using their social media accounts to make money separate from what the schools bring in. Now, I'm not naive. I realize that we're opening a floodgates here for Alabama booster to get involved, and schools with, I would say, the bigger donor bases. There might be more opportunities, but at the same time, it can also be kind of an equalizer in that, especially the non-revenue sports. Imagine what the next Katie Ledecky might be able to, could stay in college, would not necessarily feel like they have to leave college to go start training for the Olympics, because they can monetize their social media account while they're still playing in college. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for some women's athletes, non-revenue sports athletes, who they may not be as famous as to the whole country as Tua or Joe Burrow, but within their sport, they have a lot of young fans who look up to them and follow them on Instagram, and that's what these rules are built for. They're not intended for Alabama to go out and line up deals for their athletes. It's intended for the athletes to go out and monetize it themselves.
Yeah, and to complete the thought, because you touched on it perfectly there, Stuart, what Jack Swarbrick talked about was that very point. He said, look, this is right, because if a student has Notre Dame's, again, their foundation has been, if it's right for a student, it's right for everybody. So if a cello player in the orchestra can get hired in the summer and go play for their local philharmonic, right? They can do that. A student can start an app in their dorm room and monetize that. I think the inference you drew originally was the same inference I drew, which was the concept of it affecting recruiting, the imbalance in recruiting, where the offensive tackle at LSU suddenly gets a major deal to go down and sign autographs at the car dealership. I thought that's, at least that's what I inferred too.
Yeah, and I read the document, and I was impressed actually with how on the ball it was in terms of the social media aspect of it, and acknowledging exactly what you said. Hey, all the other students, anybody on our campus could start a cooking channel on YouTube, and if it becomes popular, make money off it. So why? It's not fair to keep the football players from doing that. There's a lot of language in there though about attempting to regulate the recruiting aspect of it. That, you know, not making sure boosters aren't using this as a way to influence recruiting, or there's going to be some mechanism to any deal that anybody gets has to be at fair market value. And I don't know how realistic that is. That's an admirable goal, but it's not like they've had much success over the years monitoring the illicit payments that boosters make now in recruiting, at least in some places. So I'm not sure why these changes in rules would change that much. But at the end of the day, the top recruits right now, they go to Alabama, Clemson, LSU, Ohio State. I don't think that's going to change one way or the other because of NIL rules.
Let me ask you about something that's been ongoing in college football for a long time, which is the arms race. And as long as I've been around, a little longer than you, I've watched arms race be a conversation topic in college football forever. And it's ranged in various things from facilities to head coach salaries to January admits, all these things. And now, at least to me, more recently, it's become assistant coach salaries, coordinator salaries that are just astronomical. I don't know how else to say it. Coming out of this now, I'm wondering if there's going to be a major emergency brake hit on that aspect of the college football arms race. It may be head coach salaries as well, Stewart, but especially coordinator salaries. What do you think on that?
I think this this rapid economic crisis we're in has been a real wake up call for colleges, because they had it so good for so long. The money just kept going up and up and up and up. Spend, and they never save any of it. They just find a way to spend it. I mean, just think about, remember, it was late February, mid to late February, that Mel Tucker, after 1 year at Colorado, doubled his salary by getting the job at Michigan State. So 2 months later, his successor, Carl Durrell, has to take a 10% pay cut because of the crisis that Colorado is under. And lots of other coaches and ADs have taken pay cuts or soon will take pay cuts. That's how quickly it turned overnight once the NCAA tournament got canceled and spring sports got canceled. So I think it's a huge wake up call. I think it's definitely going to put spending on hold for at least a year or two, but nothing stays that way for long in college sports. We will eventually come out of this. And I would just point to the fact that there's a 2-year period between 2023 and 2025 when 4 of the 5 power conferences have TV deals coming up. The college football playoffs next deal will come up. And live sports is still going to be extremely valuable to television networks. So I would assume we will go through a period where people are being more frugal. And then once that next wave of contracts come in, they'll go right back to figuring out ways to spend all of it.
Well, that's what, and you hit it right there, Stuart. I guess that's what I thought, because I have understood the same thing. Look, there's going to be, in the eyes of many of the conferences, a payoff down the road, but there's going to be a hit coming out of this pandemic. None of us knows what yet. Can we bridge that? I mean, we don't know the answers. Obviously, I'm rhetorically asking, can we bridge the gap in college football from whatever hit this is going to be until there's a payoff? And then what's the payoff going to be? Because we're going to bridge a little bit into media here. Cord cutting is only accelerating. Streaming is growing, right? I think satellite television, I think this may accelerate the demise of satellite television, other than in rural America, where it is the delivery system still. But is streaming, and this is clearly something that a lot of conferences are hoping for, is streaming going to invest in live sport? They're growing right now. They're growing right now with no live sport, right?
When you saw that Apple recently had conversations with the Pac-12, I think they were very preliminary, because we're still a couple years away from the Pac-12 being even able to enter negotiations on that deal. But I think that all those commissioners have been hoping for some time that when their next contracts come up for bidding, that it will be more than just ESPN and Fox and CBS, that it'll be Amazon and Apple and Netflix, that everybody, because then the more that they do that, the more it drives up the price. But this is a very interesting time to try to sort through with media analysts, because on the one hand, I mean, nobody is, I should say nobody, uh, Disney is taking a considerable hit right now. I mean, this has just been brutal for their company, and it may continue to be for some time. And so that has led some to suggest, hey, ESPN is not going to be in a position to throw money around for the next several years. And they want to keep Monday Night Football. That's their first priority, obviously. But on the other hand, they look at the viewers they're getting for the Michael Jordan documentary, for the NFL draft. If anything, I think we're going to all come out of this, whenever it is, with a greater appreciation for televised sports, especially if people can't go to the games. And so it becomes even more important to ESPN, Fox, and everybody else to make sure they keep the deals they have with the leagues they have now, and hopefully lock up new ones. So I do think it'll be very, very profitable. And I like the phrase you used before about how do we bridge it, because it would be, you see all a couple schools have already cut sports teams.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of panic, feeling like if we lose football money next year, we're going to have to cut teams left and right. And I just hope that there'll be some long-term thinking of, if we can just ride this out for the next few years, help is on the way. There is going to be an influx of money. So rather than blow up your athletic department, just kind of buckle down for a few years and know that you're eventually going to not only just be made whole, but probably be even better off than you were before this.
Yeah. Maybe the last one here, because it's following up on this point of television. For a long time now, in essence, Fox has funded Major League Baseball through Fox Network and then through all of the regional networks. And ESPN's had a piece of baseball, but basically Fox has been the big investor. Flip it to college football. ESPN owns college football, right? Fox has a piece of it, but ESPN pretty much runs it. I'm wondering, coming out of this, because of what you talked about, does ESPN, and can they shift slowly and perhaps over time to ESPN Plus, some college football programming, a streaming service that drives additional revenue?
Disney has a huge, huge, huge investment, right, in
Yeah.
streaming. ESPN Plus, I mean, Disney Plus has 50 million subscribers already. And you see a lot of uh, promos, right? I don't know what the deal is. I think you can get Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, and Hulu
Yeah, bundled.
together. Yeah, bundle. So they have major incentive to beef up ESPN Plus, but at the same time, I mean, the Big 12 has a deal with ESPN Plus. They put a bunch of basketball games on there last year, and the fans revolted. How come I have to have ESPN Plus to watch my West Virginia basketball game? So the NFL continues to be very um, beholden to the legacy networks. They'll dip their toe in Amazon Prime or whatnot, but they still really much value it being available to the widest audience possible. And I think that's probably true with college conferences too. I think they will be. They know streaming is a big part of it, and look, if you make a deal with ESPN, it includes them streaming the games too. It's not one or the other. But you have to tread very carefully about embracing new technology, but not moving too far ahead of where
Oh,
the
yeah.
consumers are right now.
No, I think and I'll speak now. I mean, look, with 8 years of Pac-12 network, I think we've learned that as much as we push streaming as a viable option for those who can't otherwise get the network, there are people in certain demos. And thankfully, Stewart knows we're in a little bit more of a technologically advanced place here, but a lot of people around the Pac footprint aren't, and they're not up to speed with that. They want to be able to push a button and put their big screen on and see the game, and they don't want to deal with streaming, and they don't want to deal with fiddling with the other stuff. So yes, that's the balance, and that's why I'm suggesting it wouldn't be everything. It would be a slow move. But I'm just wondering about, because of exactly what you said, how much Disney has invested in ESPN Plus as being the counter to cord cutting. That if that is, I just wonder, coming out of that, if that's not something we're going to see, and it's a little bit more inside TV stuff. But going ahead, how important ESPN has been to college football, and how important they are to the bowl season we talked about. That is all ESPN, right?
Right.
That's something, to me, I think, as baseball played along with Fox, they had to, because Fox was their biggest investor. I think college football and ESPN, to me, I look at it as a similar relationship.
Yeah, I mean, look, Fox has made huge inroads. I worked at Fox from 2014 to 17, or 2014 to 16 seasons, and we didn't yet have any, we weren't showing Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan, Wisconsin, some of these huge games that they were able to show last year. I think last year was a huge year for Fox. They, with the big noon kickoff, and it just worked out that they had all these Ohio State games, and Ohio State was undefeated last year. It would not surprise me if in the next wave of TV contracts, they're taken more seriously than they have been to this point by conferences that haven't been involved with them to this point. But ESPN is still clearly the leader, and the most importantly, because of what you said earlier, postseason. I mean, they own the playoff.
Yeah.
I can't see anybody getting the playoff away from them. And as long as they have that, basically ESPN's the whole season feeds into the playoff, right? People get kind of sick of those promos, who's in, and the weekly ranking shows that start in October, but they'll continue to be a huge part of the sport. I have no doubt. And that's why it'll be interesting to see, where Disney will be as a company after, if the theme parks are closed for a whole year, if you can't go to a movie theater to see the new Disney movies for a whole year, like where will that company be a year or two from now when it's time to shell out money for Monday Night Football and then the Big Ten? And I think the NBA is in there somewhere. You would probably know better than me. So it'll be very interesting to watch.
All right, last one. And Yogi couldn't be with us because he's moving and he's painting as we're doing this. So in absentia, though, I have to get one specific Pac-12 question to start. And I started this off by saying how much I admired your creativity and thinking outside the box on your piece about a potential January start for college football. Let me go back to my friend Wilner last year, his 9 a.m. kick for the Pac-12, 9 a.m. kick, 10 a.m. Mountain Time kick. I don't think there's any chance of it happening coming out of the pandemic, but let's say 2021. Give me your take on viability.
It's probably more viable for some schools than others. I mean, obviously, you don't want to alienate your own fans, and Oregon fans and Washington fans who spend all day tailgating on the lake are not going to have much of a affinity, I would think, for 9 a.m. kickoffs. Maybe some other schools where in-stadium attendance is not that great to begin with, or there's not much of a tailgating scene. Maybe you would do that for increased TV exposure. I mean, what I say about the Pac-12, I mean, it's a dilemma and I sympathize with the fans because, one thing they complain about a lot is night games, right? Games that kick off at 10:30 Eastern, either because it's inconvenient for them to attend or because those games don't get seen much on the East Coast. Well, you can't realistically expect TV to fit all of the Pac-12's games on Saturday into 2 TV windows, right? Noon Pacific and 3:30 or 4 Pacific. You need 3 TV windows. So if you don't like the nighttime kickoffs, then you've got to be open to the 9 a.m. kickoffs, or you're just not going to be on television. It's one or the other.
Yeah, and I think the other point to emphasize is, and you're right. I personally think for certain schools it would be a non-starter for a lot of reasons we don't have time to go into here. But you're talking about one. It's not the full season of 9 a.m. You'd be talking about one game. And my view has always been, if you do it right, you can make it like the NFL has made the London games. You make them an experience. And that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but I really believe it. I've seen it firsthand in the London games. It works. And so if you go once and you make it an experience, and if you're the home team and you do it once every 2 or 3 years, to me, that's a lot more palatable than Thursday night games or Friday night games. That's just my personal view. I would be, if I
make an event out of it. Think about when the World Cup is played at, in a completely different time zone than us, and people here out on the West Coast get up at 5 or 6 a.m. to watch the World Cup games, and the bars open early, and it's really fun. I think you could do that, like you said, like one Oregon game or one Washington game every 3 years to do that. Yeah, I think it would be fun, and it would definitely. I mean, the number one thing is the Pac-12 needs more exposure. Nobody could argue that, and that. I mean, the big noon kickoff, I mentioned it earlier, was extremely successful for Fox last year. It was a great strategy to move away from competing with ABC's primetime game and basically have that window to yourself. But it was always the Big Ten. I think Big Ten or Big 12. Like, it would be probably valuable to the Pac-12 to show up in there every so often.
Good. Stewart, we ran long, but thank you. Yogi sends his best. So pound him the next time.